Regarding policy briefings being broadcast live for the very first time, President Lee Jae-myung says that the changes are necessary to boost transparency of state affairs and to realize a people-centered governance. South Korea will pour over $20 billion next year alone into securing the country's future growth engines, including AI, chips, and mobility. South Korea and the United Kingdom have signed a deal to upgrade their bilateral free trade agreement after 2 years of negotiations. The updated contract promises to expand market access and strengthen economic ties between the two sides. The Lee Jae-myung administration is continuing its live policy briefings. Earlier this afternoon, the Health Ministry and the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety held their sessions, with the briefings by the Culture Ministry and the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission currently underway. President Lee earlier explained his decision to air the briefings live following mixed reactions. Our Presidential Office correspondent Song Yoo-jin starts us off.
As government ministries and agencies enter the second week of policy progress briefings now being broadcast live for the first time, President Lee Jae-myung says change may bring friction, but it is worth the effort.
공무원들 입장에서는 새로운 방식에 익숙하지 않을 수도 있고 또 예년과 같은 형태로 업무 보고하면 아마 편할 수도 있을 겁니다. 그런데 정책 과정이 투명하게 검증돼야 되고 또 그 과정에서 집단 지성이 모여야 정책에 대한 신뢰도도.
Lee made the remarks at Tuesday's cabinet meeting as opinions remain divided over the live broadcast. Supporters say the move strengthens transparency and the public's right to know, while critics argue it risks turning policy reviews into excessive discipline or public shaming. Appearing to address those concerns, the president said the new format reflects his administration's principle that the government exists to serve the people.
국정이 이 국정의 주체인 국민들에게 투명하게 공개돼야 국민 중심 국정 운영이라는 게 말에 그치지 않고 제대로 될 수가 있습니다.
On Tuesday, the Culture Ministry held its policy briefing alongside the Ministries of Health and Food and Drug Safety. President Lee stressed the importance of the arm's-length principle in the government's relationship with the arts.
일부는 또 각광을 받긴 하지만 압도적 다수는 그러지 못한 게 또 현실입니다. 개인적인 삶으로 끝나는 게 아니고 공공 영역에 영향을 미치고 사람들의 삶을 풍요롭게 풍족하게 만들죠. 그리고 세세하게 정말 구석구석 지원하되 간섭하지 않으면서도.
In line with this, the Culture Ministry plans to strengthen livelihood support measures for artists, such as offering low-interest, small loans. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Starting next year, all corporate tax brackets will be raised by 1 percentage point. The cabinet approved the revised tax code on Tuesday. Following the new rule, the maximum rate of 25% will be applied for corporate income that exceeds 300 billion won, worth some $204 million. It's a reversal of the corporate tax cut by the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Now also approved was a new separate taxation scheme on dividend income, away from comprehensive taxation. Investors will be taxed at a maximum rate of 30% for dividend income that exceeds 5 billion won. And the Lee Jae-myung administration is front-loading a fifth of its National Growth Fund next year to jumpstart its strategy for economic expansion and national prosperity. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korea is set to spend 30 trillion won, or around $20.4 billion of its 150 trillion won National Growth Fund next year. Deputy Prime Minister Koo Yoon-chul convened the Industrial Competitiveness Enhancement Ministers meeting on Tuesday, which also served as the Growth Strategy Task Force. During this session, policymakers finalized the operational roadmap for the National Growth Fund. During the meeting, it was confirmed that next year's investment will be done through a public-private matching structure. The government is putting up 15 trillion won through its Advanced Strategic Industry Fund. The capital serves as a primer to attract another 15 trillion won in matching investments from private financial institutions and banks. The task force also designated specific targets for where this investment will be focused. 6 trillion won will be funneled into artificial intelligence. The semiconductor ecosystem will receive 4.2 trillion won and 3.1 trillion won is set aside for future mobility. But capital investment is only half the battle. The government is also moving to secure the physical infrastructure of trade. Facing rising uncertainties like U.S. tariff changes and supply chain fragmentation, the task force approved the Global Logistics Supply Chain Hub strategy. The specific goal is to secure 40 overseas logistics centers and 10 major port terminals by 2030. The government also plans to raise approximately 600 billion won through a citizen participation fund. This allows the general public to invest directly in these strategic industries to share the fruits of growth. To encourage participation, the government plans to offer tax benefits and provide subordinated financial backing to reduce investment risks for the public. Deputy Prime Minister Koo emphasized that the current administration views the next 5 years as a critical golden time for the economy. He pledged that the task force will continue to oversee these investments to ensure tangible growth. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea and the United Kingdom have finalized an upgrade to their free trade agreement following 2 years of negotiations. Our Park Jun-han has more.
South Korea and the United Kingdom have agreed to sign an improved free trade agreement that could benefit each country's trade terms. The deal was concluded after 5 trade ministers' meetings over the past 2 years. Monday's deal in London significantly eases rules of origin for key Korean exports. What stands out is that for automobiles, which account for 36% of South Korea's exports to the UK last year, worth $2.39 billion, the local value-added requirement for tariff exemptions was lowered from 55% to 25% under the revised negotiations. This is expected to boost price competitiveness for electric vehicles, which often rely on imported raw materials for batteries. Barriers have also been lowered for K-food and cosmetics, allowing duty-free status even when processed with imported ingredients. Additionally, the agreement opens the British high-speed rail market to Korean firms and establishes a new framework for cooperation in AI and supply chain security. United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer welcomed the deal, saying it was a huge win for British business. British Trade Minister Chris Bryant also added that the improvements would give cast iron protections to our key industries to speed up economic growth as part of our plan for change. Before the finalization of the upgrades, the original FTA deal between the two countries was set to expire in January. The BBC claimed that the upgraded FTA secures tariff-free access for 98% of UK goods and will protect 2 billion British pounds of UK exports from an increase in tariffs. Meanwhile, South Korea is the UK's 25th largest trading partner according to the UK Department for Business and Trade. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu said in the interview with the BBC that the two countries' economies can win together through cooperation, adding Britain could serve as a gateway for South Korea in its trade with Europe, while South Korea can serve as a gateway to Asia for British companies. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
A 2024 survey of the business activities is a key indicator for corporate sales. And now last year, the total sales of South Korean companies increased, driven by strong performance in the chip industry. An Sung-jin has more.
Earnings for South Korean companies in 2024 increased on the back of a semiconductor boom. According to the Data Ministry on Tuesday, total sales from the 2024 survey of business activities, made up of nearly 15,000 companies and excludes the financial and insurance sector, reached 3,371.1 trillion won, or $2.28 trillion. That's a 5.2% increase from the year before. In particular, net profit before corporate tax surged by 20.6%. An official from the Data Ministry said that the chip industry, which suffered a downturn in 2023, played a key role in pushing the figure before corporate tax amid the global AI boom. The Trade Ministry had earlier stated that South Korea's semiconductor exports totaled $141.9 billion last year, the highest level on record. Average sales per company also rose. By industry, sales saw a hike in scientific and technical services, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation and food services. Meanwhile, sales declined in construction and the electricity and gas supply sector. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's National Security Advisor Ri Sung-lak has departed for Washington, D.C. For follow-up talks with the Trump administration on the bilateral joint fact sheet. Speaking to reporters at Incheon International Airport on Tuesday morning, Ri stressed the need for senior-level talks, noting that revising the Korea-U.S. nuclear cooperation agreement and addressing the next steps in South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines are high-stakes issues involving multiple government agencies. We also said he plans to discuss a peace on the Korean Peninsula, including ways to bring North Korea back to dialogue and ease the tensions. He will discuss these issues with U.S. Secretary of State and Acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio. The length of his stay has not been announced. South Korea and the U.S. held their first regular meeting as Seoul's foreign ministry on Tuesday to coordinate their North Korean policy based on the recently released joint fact sheet. With the foreign ministry's Vice Minister for Diplomatic Strategy and Intelligence, Chung Yeon-do, and the acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea, Kevin Kim, present at the meeting, they held comprehensive talks addressing all issues related to the Korean Peninsula. The ministry added the agenda included reaffirming the allies' commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, North Korea, and urging the regime to return to dialogue. Now, meanwhile, the Unification Ministry did not attend the meeting, saying it would directly consult with the U.S. on North Korea policy if necessary. It instead held a separate briefing later that afternoon for foreign diplomatic missions and international organizations in Seoul. Following Korea Zinc's multi-billion-dollar plan to build a core minerals refinery in the U.S., Washington has replied with excitement. While expectations are growing around the joint project between the two countries, some experts speak about its potential impact on the Korean economy. Our Park Kwon takes a closer look.
Just hours after the world's largest zinc smelting company, Korea Zinc, unveiled plans to build a $7.4 billion critical minerals refinery in Tennessee, the U.S. has responded with enthusiasm. On Monday, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick welcomed the joint project, calling it a big win for America. He added the deal would help strengthen U.S. national security, rebuild the industrial base, and eventually reduce dependence on foreign supplies. Lutnick also said Washington would gain priority access to Korea Zinc's expanded global production starting in 2026. Under the plan, Korea Zinc will sell around 10% of its shares to a U.S.-led joint venture in which the U.S. Department of Defense will hold a 40% stake. The U.S. Commerce Department is also set to provide subsidies of up to $201 million under the CHIPS Act. Calling the move a rare type of investment, one expert says the deal could signal a shift in how Washington views Seoul as a strategic partner.
It does show that U.S. may be thinking of Korea as becoming a more reliable partner because there's not an appropriate American investor available to establish the smelting plants and factories. So this could be a beginning of a new relationship between U.S. and Korea.
However, the same also cautioned that the partnership could carry risks.
They seem to have a habit of buying up companies or trying to control companies using political justification rather than economic justification. There are some worries whether this investment will be run with profit and mutual benefit in mind, or whether it will be just a method for the United States to get unilateral gains out of this relationship.
And he also said it would be better for the Korean government to maintain a neutral stance, noting that the partnership is between one private Korean company and the U.S., particularly given Seoul's relationship with China. Meanwhile, the facility to be built in Clarksville, Tennessee, northwest of Nashville, is scheduled to open in 2029 and is expected to produce around 540,000 metric tons of critical minerals annually. The output will be used in key sectors, including AI, semiconductors, and defense systems. Park Kwon, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters on Monday that a Russian-Ukraine peace deal is closer now than ever before. He also suggested that there could be security guarantees for Ukraine against future attacks by Russia. Ian-jin has the story.
Marathon talks have been taking place between President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, as well as Ukrainian and European officials in Berlin. While trying to pressure Kyiv into accepting terms that will end the Russia-Ukraine war, Washington is offering Ukraine security guarantees similar to those it would receive as part of NATO. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Sunday that Kyiv concedes and no longer seeks NATO membership, which was a condition that Russia has repeatedly sought, but insisted on so-called Article 5-like security guarantees. NATO's Article 5 states that an attack on one member nation is interpreted as an attack against all, which would protect Ukraine against future Russian aggression. Details on what the guarantees would entail or how they would work have not yet been elaborated on, but President Trump has clarified that Europe would be a big part of it. Saying that a peace deal in Ukraine is, quote, closer now than we have ever been, President Donald Trump signaled that the U.S. was close to agreeing on the security guarantees, clarifying that such assurance from the U.S. would require congressional approval. This is the strongest and most explicit security pledge the Trump administration has put forward for Ukraine. As the Americans and Ukrainians continue negotiations on this front, a U.S. official said earlier Monday that while roughly 90% of the issues between Russia and Ukraine have been solved, the issue of territorial concessions remains a sticking point, which the two parties need to come to terms with. Putin has demanded that Ukraine must surrender territory for the war to end, to which Zelensky to date has refused to cede any. Negotiations are expected to continue through this coming weekend. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
With the end of the year approaching, President Lee Jae-myung and First Lady Kim Ye-kyung invited donation organizations to his office today. President Lee thanked them for their role of providing aid to people in need, as he went on to say that the government at times fell short of protecting the vulnerable and that it should defend what he called the minimum safety line. Among the invited were the Salvation Army, the Korean Red Cross, and the Community Chest of Korea, along with children who have benefited from their donations. The first couple also made donations on Tuesday. The 6-month investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's alleged insurrection came to a conclusion on Monday, and the special prosecutor's probe is reshaping the legal and political narrative around the former president's declaration of martial law. For more, we are joined by our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun here in the studio. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tammy.
So, Hae-ryun, the former president argued that the martial law was a response to a political emergency tied to the 2024 general election, but the special investigators tell a different story. Now, what did investigators really uncover about when and how all the preparations began?
So as you've said, Tammy, the special prosecutor's conclusion directly contradicts the former president's explanation. And investigators are saying that the preparations for the martial law declaration actually began before October 2023, which is well ahead of the April 2024 general election that former President Yoon Suk-yeol cited as the trigger. So rather than an emergency response, the probe describes the declaration as a long-term political decision discussed and developed over more than a year. According to the findings, Yoon referenced emergency presidential authority soon after taking office and by late 2022 spoke to allies about using extraordinary powers. Language investigators say points to intent rather than impulse. By mid to late 2023, preparations had intensified, with key military appointments and discussions over timing. At that point, prosecutors say martial law was no longer hypothetical, but an operational plan detached from any single political event.
Then, Hae-ryung, how extensive was this plan, and what does the investigation reveal about the scope of power that the former president and his allies were prepared to seize?
So the special prosecutor describes a power seizure plan that goes well beyond just, suspending the civil order. And investigators say that it involved using the military to paralyze the National Assembly, halt political activity, and neutralize opposition forces. Evidence recovered during the probe outlines plans to block parliamentary funding, occupy government institutions, and create an emergency legislative body to replace the Assembly. Arrest and detention lists were also confirmed, including sitting lawmakers and election officials, with intelligence officers tasked with detaining election staff under claims of fraud. Prosecutors say this amounted to an attempt to seize all three branches of power, executive, legislative, and judicial, creating what they describe as an unchecked authoritarian system. In that context, the case is framed not as a technical breach of procedure, but as an attempt to overturn the constitutional order, a question now moving to the courts.
Whether this constitutes insurrection remains an open question, but the special prosecutor's findings appear to proceed on the premise that it does, with the final determination left to the courts.
Then what lines does the investigation draw in terms of, accountability, and what kind of unanswered political questions does this case leave behind?
So the special prosecutor says that the investigation has drawn some clear legal lines, but there are some questions that remain unanswered in the political field. And on the judicial and legislative fronts, the probe found no evidence of institutional involvement. Allegations that the Supreme Court or its leadership had prior knowledge of the martial law declaration were dismissed, as were claims that lawmakers obstructed the National Assembly's vote to lift it. At the center of power, however, responsibility was sharply defined. Over 6 months, investigators reviewed 249 cases, indicted 27 people, and detained 3 key figures, including former President Yoon. 8 former cabinet ministers and 9 presidential office officials were also sent to trial, extending accountability to senior aides. Legal experts say the true impact of the probe goes beyond the former president himself.
The key achievement of the special prosecutor's investigation lies in the indictments and first instance trials, which for the first time examined the alleged illegality of cabinet ministers failing to stop the president's dangerous use of emergency powers.
The probe also examines the political context, identifying power retention as the core motive, while noting legal risks facing Yoon and the former First Lady as contributing factors rather than separate charges. The findings point to a familiar conclusion. The legal process may be nearing completion, but political responsibility remains unsettled, underscoring the need for institutional reforms as the debate continues.
Well, we'll have to follow what happens next, both in the courtroom and on the political front. Do keep us posted. Hae-ryung, thanks for coming in tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No sooner has the cold spell eased off than rain is back in the forecast. Light rain has been coming and going mainly around the center areas, and it will continue to fall occasionally through tonight. Some areas with low temperatures could see some rain turning into snow. Slippery roads can be expected on the way to work tomorrow morning. However, no severe cold will be seen this week. Seoul's morning temperature climbed back above freezing to 2.2 degrees Celsius this morning, and highs reached 8 degrees, slightly warmer than the average for this time of year. Similar temperatures are expected tomorrow. Seoul and Daegu will start off at 3 degrees tomorrow morning, with Gwangju at 6 degrees. Highs will rise up to 7 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 14 degrees in Busan. Once the rain stops tonight, fine dust will make a return around the Seoul metropolitan area and Chungcheongnam-do province. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.